Okay, so today on the 5am Grind, we're delighted to bring you a guest interview with Huda Idrees, founder and CEO of Dot Health. Dot Health is a real-time personal health platform that is empowering Canadians to request, access, and manage their own healthcare information. Before founding Dot Health, Huda worked at Wattpad and also at Wealthsimple, some of the best-known startups in Toronto.
Yep.
Huda has also helped advise the Canadian federal and provincial health ministries on strategy and currently serves on the board of directors for Ontario MD and the Sinai Health System. She's also won numerous awards, including the YWCA's Toronto's Young Women of Distinction and Bay Street Bulls Top 30 Under 30. We hope you enjoyed this interview with Huda. Enjoy. All right, so today on the 5am Grind, we're delighted to welcome Huda Idrees, founder and CEO of Dot Health, to the podcast. Huda, welcome to the 5am Grind.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So for those of our listeners who don't know what Dot Health does, could you provide a brief explanation of what it is that you do?
Sure. So the best parallel we've managed to come up with is that we're the Visa of health data. So similar to how Visa transacts financial information, we transact health data like your lab results, your imaging, doctor's notes, et cetera, between healthcare providers and also between healthcare providers and their patients. And we allow individuals to carry their health records around on their smartphones. We actually cut down on a lot of paper waste because we transact all this information digitally instead of having people fax each other documents, which, believe it or not, is the alternative today.
Wow. Fantastic. So just to cover a bit of your background, tell us a little bit about the founding story of Dot Health. What did you do before founding the company? I believe you worked at Wealthsimple and then at Wattpad as well, and then you founded the company. Just walk us through that story.
I went to engineering school, so I'm an engineer by trade, but have worked exclusively at startup companies since. So Wattpad was the first one, then it was Wave, then it was Wealthsimple. And I did mostly product and design roles at all of them. So some of them kind of went, into the product management realm, and others were more focused on being a designer full time. And with Dot, I started it off the side of my desk when I was still at Wealthsimple. There was a friend of mine, his dad got diagnosed with late stage cancer. And he was honestly struggling with collating all his information. He didn't really understand what was going on with his own body. And that can be a really isolating experience in a weird way, because you're seeing so many healthcare providers and yet you're not really involved in your own care, his own cancer marker progress. And it morphed from there. A lot of it was word of mouth early days. At one point, I had like 200 instances of Heroku running, like independent instances, because I didn't think early on to make.
Got it.
And then I finally clued in when lots of people were on coincidence.
So love that story. Thank you for sharing. Do you think that working at a lot of the startup companies was that a big entrepreneurial influence for you to start your own company, or was there something in your childhood that sort of pushed you to become an entrepreneur?
I mean, my dad's an entrepreneur, and I think a large part of it was his sort of understanding or belief system that everyone should always own their own business. They shouldn't, he was a big believer in not selling your time, because he said it was limited and it limited you. And so what you need to do is actually, take part or at least have massive equity in whatever you were building. So I think that was always at the back of my mind. I think startups in general, though, they were really cool then. Like, I feel like I feel like they've kind of lost a bit of their luster, but they were really, really neat at the time. I could do so many things. I could play with a lot of stuff. At Wattpad, I kind of made my own job description. And that was really cool for someone like me, who I think walks a bit of a line between the creative parts and the technical parts. I could never really decide which part I fit in. And being an entrepreneur gave me this like really lovely way of infusing those two. And often hiring people who were way better at both those sides than I was, and watching them hone their craft while working on an idea that I typically really cared about at all the startups I worked at, and of course at Dot.
So what did your dad do that made him give you that advice for kind of having that stake in the business? you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, no, I think for him, he, was part of the diaspora that moved to the Middle East to, in search of a better life, as they say, and there worked really lucrative jobs initially as an engineer. He went to school for electrical engineering, and built, kind of everything. His work experience runs the gamut of, literally building the road network in the city of Yambo in Saudi Arabia to like laying power grids down for some of the newer developments in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So I think for him, he knew both sides of it, and he also knew how much it limited him when he was working for someone else versus like when I was born is when he started his own firm. And it kind of transformed his life. It changed the way he looked at stuff. It changed the way that he even ran his own sort of day-to-day life. It definitely like changed a lot of our lives. Like I think I would have grown up very differently had he not been an entrepreneur. I think we went through like really tough times and came out the other end. So I think there were a lot of experiences there that he looked back on very fondly. And even though, when I was at Wealthsimple, I did have equity in the business and I was an early team member there, it almost wasn't enough for him. He was like, no, you need to just like found your own thing and not try to just be like the early stage employee person. And I think part of it was just his own experience and his own positive experience of running his own thing and being his master of his own destiny.
That's fantastic. I do like your story because you obviously grew up in Saudi Arabia and then you moved to Toronto. A lot of immigrants obviously do the same thing. What was that experience like, and why did you pick Toronto? Just curious.
It was, so a lot of people are like, was it a big culture shock for you? But I grew up in Jeddah, and I think it's because people don't know Jeddah. It is the most metropolitan city. Like, there are so many people from all walks of life that both live and work there, but also, kind of land there for the pilgrimage. So maybe people don't know this, but Jeddah and Mecca are twin cities, and Mecca is like a holy city for Muslims. Mecca doesn't have an airport. So all the pilgrims, about 14, 15 million of them every year, actually fly into Jeddah from all around the world. And I think it's a very different flavor. So Toronto actually wasn't a culture shock necessarily for me. It was more like I wasn't used to the weather at all because I'm like a desert child through and through. So I was like, why is there a snowstorm on the day of my calc exam? That was quite challenging. But other than that, it felt very familiar, I think, to me. To be honest, like it wasn't really my doing. I really wanted to go to Cornell. And I got into Cornell. They have a massive, I wanted to be a research scientist at one point. And so they had this like massive research building that I was just so enamored with. So I was pretty sure I wanted to go there. My older sister at the time was also applying to schools, and U of T was actually the only school we both applied to. And she and I are quite close, and she got in, and I was like, well, I got in too. It'd be kind of fun if we did this. And then U of T gave me a mostly free ride. So it made the decision a lot easier than going to a different city.
Fantastic. Nice. Yeah. And then coming to starting Dot Health, was that the first company you started, or did you try something else before?
I used to run, I feel like a lot of kids did this, but when I was like actually a child, I got into web development and I started and ran a web development agency for a long time, like up until I was an undergrad. I had like one employee at one point because I needed him to like do some of the like database sequencing stuff that I didn't want to do. But that's it. Like that's really, I mean, part of the founding story of Wealthsimple in general from like Mike's apartment, but other than that, not really. Hadn't really dabbled in doing something on my own. Nothing really made sense, I think. And Dot also wouldn't have made sense had it not already been a thing. So I think part of it, people think starting a company is some long schemed out process of, we like sat down and we did this thing. And it really isn't. It was a bit of an accident. I think just like a happy accident. Because for most people, and especially for someone like me who doesn't have family in Toronto, don't really have like a massive safety net to fall back on, it almost has to be that way. I don't have the luxury of being like, yeah, my parents lent me $500,000 and I'm going to, code away until I figure out what problem I'm most attracted to. It wasn't really like that. So I think it almost had to be that way, at least for me.
That's awesome.
But I mean, I do want to add one thing though. You may not have that safety net, but I do feel like, from what you've said today, the encouragement that you got from your dad is a lot more than most entrepreneurs. Because for most people, you have that front where the family's kind of like, go get a job. Because, you need to get a paycheck, you need to get married, you need to do all this stuff with your life, buy a house, car, whatever bills come in. And so the idea that having a job, at least in your mind, feels like for a lot of parents, there's no risk, even though there may be more risk with the job than there is with the company. So then, yep.
For sure.
So then my question then is, if you had to go back, what is one thing that you would do differently if you could go back?
Like specifically about Dot or just like my life?
Just your entrepreneurial journey. If there was one tweak that you could make, what would it be? Knowing that what you know now, okay? Because I'm sure that when you were going through the entrepreneurship, there's a lot of sleepless nights. It's not easy. There's a lot of, you need courage, right? Because you don't know what to expect tomorrow. Because I think Elon Musk quotes it as starting your own or being an entrepreneur is like chewing glass and looking into the abyss. So because you don't know what to expect and it's very painful. So knowing what you know now, what would be something that you would do differently if you had to do this all over again? Just your journey.
Yeah, I'm struggling because I do find I got a lot of what I wanted out of each of my startup experiences. Specifically in Dot, I think I would have probably gone B2B first. I feel like I went direct to consumer. And I think the reason was sort of like the origin of the app itself. I wish I'd gone B2B, which is where we've pivoted to now as a business. I kind of wish I'd done that sooner. That's kind of where all the revenue is anyway in health tech. And I think it would have saved us a lot of pain early days of trying to like bang our head against the wall on like the consumer revenue model. So specifically, I think that's it. But other than that, honestly, I got so lucky with so many of my placements and a lot of the companies that I kind of found that there's not much I think I would change there at all.
Well, that's good.
The timing was right.
Contentment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Nice. Why did you choose to focus on healthcare? Because it seems like you said when you worked at Wattpad and Wealthsimple as well, you wanted to focus on healthcare. Why?
So I went to school for industrial engineering, and a huge aspect of industrial is sort of like an area called operations research. And typically people who go into OR talk about, the optimization of stuff. That's a lot of what industrial engineering is about. So we actually saw a lot of examples of inefficiencies in healthcare that I was just curious about and like tried to learn more about and didn't quite understand. So I think it was always very opaque, and healthcare is a very opaque industry in general. Like, it is not a surprise to anyone that it's like this. So I think it was more, I wanted to be able to use my powers for good. And a huge part of me always felt a little bit guilty if I was using it just to, advance some kind of, perverse model to like track more eyeballs or, like provide more entertainment. They talk about how Netflix's biggest competition is sleep. And I find that really like, that's such a dystopian future. Like, I don't want to have any part in building that. So that was always true for me. Wattpad was like an entertainment company and Wave was a bit more utility. So it was a lot more, okay, we're helping entrepreneurs. And you can almost like, if anyone kind of looks at my journey, you can almost see I was trying to move myself more and more towards stuff that people couldn't either live without, or it would like improve their lives dramatically, versus just like a floofy, I work in ad tech or I work in entertainment or, I don't know. That just doesn't speak to me and doesn't make me feel good. Like, I want to be able to feel good about something that I do. So I think just in terms of motivation, my motivation isn't typically money, which has been like a big problem throughout my career, I think.
Got it. So specifically about the company, about just healthcare in Canada, are you guys in Ontario only, or are you guys expanding across the country? Because talk us through that. How is it navigating different provinces? Because healthcare is different in each and every province. I would think, how is that? Just dealing with that.
Yeah, it was really challenging initially. We had to go through really extensive audits when we first started. So we spent like the first 8 years of like, we raised capital, and then we spent 8 months really doing a lot of this auditing process of making sure that we comply with every single provincial and federal legislation around health data, because we do collect and cache and deal with personal identifiable health information, which is very different than anyone who has the identified data, for example. We're held to different standards. So that was really challenging. I'm glad we did that right up front. So I think that helped us in terms of our expansion. We are available coast to coast across Canada. We've also rolled out actually in the US and Mexico. So we're technically across North America. We do have big dreams and aspirations to expand globally. This is truly a global problem. No one's really cracked it. No one's really in a position where you would say they're an obvious winner, even some of the larger technology giants. So I think there's just a ton of opportunity, which is really exciting.
That's fantastic. What's been the one most frustrating aspect of dealing with the healthcare system? Because, we're obviously consumers of the healthcare system. We've seen one aspect of it, but you just dealing with them as businesses, what's the most frustrating thing?
I mean, it's both the good and the bad of public healthcare systems. So DOT is unfortunately sits right at the center of those two things because we benefit from the fact that it is a public healthcare system. And so they're motivated to share information because they do actually want to, have the patient go through the experience in a way that's not so painful. So there is definitely the motivation there. And because there's not a profit factor, they're more motivated to share. So in the US, for example, we've come up against a lot of barriers where health networks will say, well, I don't want to share my information with another health network because I will lose a customer. That's very different in Canada. So on that side, we win. But sort of like, this is like it's a blessing and a curse because I think that it's very slow in a public healthcare system. So when we're trying to work with government, which has been like just horrendous to deal with, or now we work directly with the hospitals, actually, there's not as much a sense of urgency because there's not a profit factor. So I think that's a very frustrating line to toe. And I can't say that we've figured it out entirely. I think we've been successful, especially during COVID, a lot more. And we've managed to, shorten our sales cycles. But other than that, it's been really frustrating.
Well, quick question though: aren't the majority of the files with family physicians within Canada, or no? They are.
Yeah,
right?
so about 95% of your health record typically lives within the GP's files, and GPs and primary care practitioners in general are very disconnected from the rest of the healthcare system. So we do have, a varying degree of partnerships with the EMR companies that sell to a lot of these primary care physicians, and that is a lot of our network. But that's also frustrating because they're so small. So for a hospital, for example, you'll get, a million or so unique visits a year, whereas for an individual family practitioner, you go through a similar amount of work to set them up, but they only really have 2,000 patients any given year, and that's challenging for sure.
But then wouldn't now I'm just like I guess talking out of this little experience that I have with the healthcare system, but I would assume that though with the primary care physicians, I say family physicians because I think that's the term in the States. I don't know if it's the same term here, but are the primary care physicians, don't they have an incentive to keep the file with them? Because if it goes, their client goes, essentially, even though they're getting paid by the government, it's still their business in a way?
Sort of, but not as much as you would expect in the States or in a private healthcare system, because the way it works, there's two really models for family care physicians in Canada. We have a huge shortage of family care physicians. So they're not so bothered by losing a client because they usually have a giant wait list anyway. So it doesn't matter so much to them. Then you either get like a capped model where you're paid for every rostered patient, or if you're in some kind of a walk-in clinic, then you just get paid for every visit. The other part of the legislation that's kind of a good thing is if you're within the circle of care, so if there's a physician who's treating you, say in the ER or something like that, the family physician cannot withhold any information about your health history from them. So there's a huge sort of legislative motive for them to be able to share. And that helps us in a lot of ways, because if we can streamline that process, then we can actually win clients that way. And the policy is actually on our side, which isn't often the case. So that helps.
Fantastic. How has it been just dealing with, because, the thing about government as well that I sort of always keep in mind is they rotate every 4 years. There's always a new election, there's a new government, etc. Has that been frustrating for you, that lack of long-term thinking sometimes in healthcare? Talk us through that process.
Yes, I mean, with government, so we don't deal directly with the Ontario ministry or, the federal government in that way. And I think this is a lesson we learned, because early days we thought they were our client and that's it. So it was literally like we thought the equation was Ministry of Health on one side and the patient on the other side. But the problem is the ministry doesn't often have access to some of the data that the patients need because it either sits at the hospital end, and by the time it collates on the government end, it's too late or it's stale, or it hasn't made it through whatever it is. So we learned a lot about where the data actually lives. So we don't sell to the Ontario government. And just the way the legislation's set up, they don't really oversee us either. So we're kind of, we've removed ourselves from that equation altogether. We, of course, every now and then will advise them on certain stuff, and that's really frustrating because it feels like they don't really understand what's going on, or they don't get why giving patients access to health data is important. Like, they just don't see it. Literally everyone else sees it in the system. And the ministry is like, but why? Why do the patients need to see their own results? They don't even understand it. So it's a very arcane way of thinking. And we just kind of wash our hands of it because we're not going to be able to change it.
Wow. How's it been just dealing with that frustration? Because it seems like it's not an easy thing. It requires a lot of patience because you want to move really quickly. They have a different pace, like you said. What's been the trick to be able to deal with that?
There is no trick. There are literally days where we're like, what are we doing? And then there are days where we're like, wow, we're like saving the world.
It sounds like a true entrepreneur right there.
It's so rough. And even when there will certainly be so many highs where we'll land a big client, sign, a massive deal. And then literally the same day we'll talk to some tiny clinic and they'll be like, no, we don't believe in giving patients access to health data. And we'll go into the deepest of lows. And it's actually interesting because me and the entire team, honestly, and we've had, knock on wood, lots of ease in recruiting because I think our mission speaks to so many people. The team is very attached to this problem, which I think helps us go through the highs and lows. And, aside from the ministry and aside from the government, most people actually understand why patients need access to the data. So I think it's definitely the minority. And that's why I'm saying we kind of wash our hands of it, because if it's, people you're never going to be able to convince, you have to be able to move on to people that you can, especially as a startup entrepreneur. You have to be able to say, listen, we cover 70% of the market, and the 30% we can't convince, too bad, but we've done something better than whatever the alternative was before. And that's been true for us. That's helped for sure.
So how big is your team?
We're 16 people right now, and we've actually shrunk because of COVID. Because we used to be over 30, so we've literally gone half the size. We pivoted away from our consumer business, which was a huge part of our CS team. So that kind of went away. And then a lot of our sort of user-centric, right now, the .health apps are more companion apps, and we focused a lot of our efforts on our B2B offering, which is all web-based. So a lot of our mobile team hasn't been a huge part of our sort of growth journey. We've managed to find everyone, great places to land in. But I feel pretty good about how Dot's been able to handle it. But yeah, huge sort of shrinking process even before this was even before COVID.
Got it. In terms of the long-term vision, then you said I'm not sure how much of the market you cover right now. What's the sort of the vision for 5 years down the road?
We want to be able to expand. So I think entering the US at all was a big thing for us, and being able to expand and look at that market for the behemoth that it is huge. And I think that's something we want to focus on. The other sort of pet project of mine that I've kind of worked on for a really long time, which we call a wild card on our roadmap, because I'm only allowed to spend a limited amount of time on it because it's a bit of a moonshot, is the NHS. In the UK. So they're my dream clients. They're very different from any other health authority in the whole world. And it would be incredible to sign up the NHS for being a .health partner, because they deal and collect data in different ways than really any other government does. So those are sort of big items for us. Which path we actually take to get to those, or get to kind of a global scope, depends. I think it depends on, if we sign up any strategic partners and we use their avenues to get there, or if we do it ourselves and raise crazy amounts of venture. So I think that path is TBD, but yeah.
Nice. Is there a government out there that is further down the line in this? I don't know, but in your view, if you've looked at other countries like the UK, I don't know, Lithuania seems to be pretty advanced in some of this stuff. I don't know, just curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so there are governments like Estonia is probably the best at this.
Right.
So Estonia has every single thing is digital. In Estonia, it's really incredible. So different countries have actually done a really good job. So most Scandinavian countries have it down pat. They've usually collated all the hospitals into a single EMR or EHR system that helps them access this data in some way. I think a lot of them kind of miss out on a lot of the user friendly features that Dot was started on. Like a lot of our basic premise, they kind of miss, but they'll provide basic access. So even if it's like a PDF on your phone, they'll at least do that, which is more than what any Canadian government on a provincial level can say for their clients. So I think there's always missing gaps, of course, but different countries, especially the smaller ones, have done really well in this regard.
Nice. Okay. All right. So do you have any other background career questions for Huda? No? All right. So we'll move on to our sort of success habits questions, just productivity in general. These are questions we've asked all of our guests that have been on the show. So they're very generic type questions. Just wanted to know like how you function, what some productivity tips you have and stuff like that. Our podcast is obviously called The 5 a.m. Grind. I wake up close to 5. Horace, not so much. Just wondering, in terms of your morning routine and daily routine, what time do you wake up? Do you do anything to set your day just to be productive?
It usually follows, honestly, the time of year. So I'll try and I aim to wake up so I can pray Fajr, and like that's kind of it. Like it's not really I'm set to the clock. It's more like when is sunrise, so I can make sure that I'm praying on time. So most of it
that's
for
after
me,
7 this time of year, isn't it?
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm saying. It's like perfect. You get to either like sleep in or not, depending on when the sun is going to be up. Which works for me, which I quite enjoy, and I also think I'm very affected by light. This is not true. Like for a huge chunk of my undergrad, I lived in like a basement apartment with like no light. I don't know how I function, but now I actually can't. Like the sun has to set my routine. I have to be, which is why winter months are actually really depressing for me. February in Toronto is actually my least favorite. If I can escape it, I will escape it. Like I hate it so much. Because light dictates a lot of my life. I think in general, I usually work out in the morning. So that's often another thing that helps set my day up. So there are days I hurt my wrist earlier this week, and so I can't. My trainer actually sent me home. He was like, "You're not allowed to like work on this wrist," and it's like a kickboxing gym, so I couldn't go. And I'm like so frustrated. I feel like my energy levels for the day are like all askew because I didn't go to the gym, which seems like a very unlike me thing. Actually, I didn't used to be this way, but it's helped me a lot. It gives me a ton of energy throughout the day if I work out in the morning. I run when I'm not at the gym, or like yoga in the morning is a really easy one to get into if you're healthy and not like me at the moment. And then not drinking coffee is actually the other thing that's been really game changing for me.
Wow.
Giving up coffee has been huge.
Yeah. I do that in Ramadan, but that's it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I can't do it.
I just find coffee makes you have a very restricted period of productivity. And if you don't have coffee, you can actually extend it. And with remote work, I've just found I'm working at different hours, and that it seems to work. I loved our office, and we gave it up last year. And I was really sad about it. But now I kind of understand the remote work benefits.
Fantastic. Nice. All right. Any methods that you use to plan out your day or month, year, sort of longer term type things? Do you use anything like that?
Not particularly. I think for me, a lot of it is dictated by how Dot is doing. So you can tell by like my personal mood how the company is doing typically. So it's like very tied to me. It's like a weird extension of my being. You guys can probably relate. Like I don't.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
So I can't control it. Like when it's Q4 is like a riot, so I'm like all over the place because of that. And then Q1 is like a lot slower, so I'm like a lot calmer at the beginning of the year. So I do feel like Dot's roadmap dictates kind of my personal roadmap as well in a lot of ways. And my life does tend to revolve around Dot Health and what it's up to, which I think you can't really help as an entrepreneur. But other than that, I mean, I have sort of, broader goals of like where I want to be able to see that they're, again, all attached to the business for the most part. I think personally for me, I get very interested in different topics and I want to be able to learn. And I have this like bad habit of starting like a bunch of things on the side. So even though I like run Dot full time, I have these like weird experiments that I run on the side. So some of them will actually like kind of go off and spin off into being their own businesses at some point. But I will do this and they're just based on my personal interests. So I just like learning. I read a lot. I like typically do a book a day. And that really helps I think it helps my like neuroticism a little bit because it keeps it at bay.
Oh, wow. Book a day is a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. I did want to ask you, because I did see an interview of yours recently, and you said something which resonated with Horace and I, because we've done an entire podcast on this. And you said that Canadians were, and apologize, I'm just paraphrasing, so if I get it wrong, please correct me. You said that as Canadians, we're very risk averse and we hesitate to adopt new technologies, even if they're homegrown. How do you think we can change this attitude? Because we've noticed the same thing as Canadians, even as entrepreneurs, we're very risk averse. We're hesitant to start a new business or things like that. It's very different from the U.S. Why do you think that is, and how can we change it?
I don't think we can change it, especially not in the short term. Because the problem is that it's a cultural thing. So when I look back to any country that's done it differently, you need to be able to support entrepreneurs on a very different level. So for example, you guys probably heard, it was maybe a couple weeks ago, the whole sort of commotion around the U.S. bill that was for buy stuff that's built in America. I think it was for electric vehicles specifically. And the Canadian government was like losing their minds. And I was like, that is so silly, because all you have to do is start buying from your own people and you will fix this problem. They were so worried that they won't be able to sell to the American public. And all the plants that are in, Ontario and other places in Canada are actually American companies. So we actually, we're on such a weak position and we continue to be in that position. So unless we change our leadership dramatically, I don't think this goes away, unfortunately. And I don't think it's a party thing. So I don't think, if the Libs are in or the, PCs are in, this is going to change it dramatically. I think it actually matters if you have like a visionary leader. So I think about Estonia and how they, because they're a very young country, their leadership is the reason they kind of came out of it and increased their GDP from literally a couple $100s to thousands of dollars over the course of, a decade or so. It is incredible to see that type of growth in a very small country. So people are like, well, Canada's too small to do something. Estonia has 1.3 million people. That's Toronto. Even if Toronto had a mayor who could stand up to, big corporations and actually support entrepreneurs, it would dramatically change the way entrepreneurship works in the city, but we don't. And I think we have really tired politicians, career politicians who don't care about working themselves out of a job and, who just kind of want to do the bare minimum and do the status quo and, just make room for American companies to come and literally buy up all of our IP. I don't think we change that until we're really, really bold and someone dramatically visionary comes in and shakes the whole system up.
Do you think the educational system is to blame as well, partly? It discourages you from trying something and failing, or just, trying something instead of just getting a cushy job somewhere?
That's a good question. I don't know. I didn't go to high school here, so I don't know. I would say the U of T culture was very entrepreneurial. And there are a lot of people from my program and my year that have actually gone on to found their own businesses. And I think that's part of the reason for that. And that's just my limited view of how it works. I'm sure in other schools and other departments and other faculties, it's very different. I thought engineering was fantastic. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if if the high school culture plays into it very much. I also think we don't tend to celebrate our own people. And so that makes it really difficult for the youth to actually see that it's possible. And this is sort of across the board. So this is in entertainment, this is in entrepreneurship, everywhere. And you'll see most of our biggest successes move right out. They never stay in Canada. And there's a reason for that, is because sometimes they want to do cool stuff and nobody will let them. And that's just,
and there's
like,
also
it's
more
just
money in the
bonkers.
States. So
There is more money, but I also think if we started supporting our own people, we could do that. You know what I mean? And we choose not to. So I do think it's choice rather than like, oh, that's just the economics of it. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, but here's the other thing, though. I'll give you another argument. You tell me which side you're going to be on, because we're getting into politics, and we're not normally into politics on this podcast, but that door's been opened. So I would argue, and you can, if you don't want to answer, it's perfectly fine. But I would argue that one of the things, for example, that prevents businesses taking risks, and I'm sure you've seen this, is when you're hiring somebody, you got to think a million times, because as soon as you hire them, you can't just fire them the next day. There's a lot of kind of strings attached. Whereas, for example, in the States, there's at-will hiring. You can hire somebody and fire them for no reason the next day and not owe them a single penny. Okay. So, and that allows people to take more risks and start more ventures. There's also the fact that there's more money available because people, I would say, arguably care less about losing that money. They're more, let's throw it out there and see here. People kind of are more like, okay, well, I got to answer to A, B, and C. So, and then lastly, even healthcare. So in the States, I know that there's tons of people who are showing up every day to work. Right or wrong, I'm not arguing the morality of it, because they need insurance for healthcare and they need to keep showing up. And so they'll come in and they'll work more diligently. They'll work harder, I would say, arguably, than Canadians, just because there's a lot of things that are pushing them to work harder, because if they lose the job, they don't just lose a paycheck, they lose a lot of things. Over here in Canada, when I say over here in Canada, you've got a good safety cushion. You can go on welfare, you can get government assistance, your healthcare is completely taken care of. So there's a lot of, and that's why when you see the poorer parts of Toronto are nowhere near the poorer parts of the States. So would you argue tomorrow, if somebody comes in and says, okay, well, let's legislate so that we can have no public health care and we can get rid of the safety net for Canadians and these rights that they're vested in their jobs, would you be against that or with that?
I think you're the point. What I'm getting from this is just like the socialism aspect of it. So Canada's like a pseudo-socialist government, and we have public universal care, but it's not. And it makes
people universal. A little bit lazy. We don't even have student debt here, so it's like not lazy, complacent. But I also think it's helpful to look at other countries and other models. So the U.S. is definitely hustle culture, and there's good and there's bad, right? Yeah. So people are just drowning in like healthcare debt in the U.S. And I would never advocate for a system that does that. I do think some of our public systems, because they're public, are complacent. So, for example, if we had, what's a good industry example for something like this? If you have any industry that's both a little bit public and a little bit private, often they almost like compete against you. So Germany is a great example of this in the healthcare space, where everyone must have insurance, but those contracts are given to a bunch of private companies and they have to compete on price. And that actually creates a system that motivates the sort of, all these people competing for these clients to bring down their prices and amp up their customer service. In Canada, that's not true, because we have a purely healthcare system that's delivered by public, people who are governed by the public sector or employees of the government, like most doctors are in our country. And that actually makes it so that we're often paying more and getting less. So it's not that Canada's not, in the province of Ontario, especially during COVID, I think our healthcare spending went up to $70 billion. We're a province of 14 million people. That's like multiple billions a person. Like, it is just nuts how much money we spend on the healthcare system. And I would argue we don't actually get a lot of value out of it, because there's no motivation to like improve customer service and, compete on other aspects of it, like we do perhaps in the States. But at the same time, you look at countries in Scandinavia, especially, that have done really well in healthcare, and Denmark and entrepreneurship. So Denmark is a socialist government. They do have universal care for all of they have public education systems. You can go to university for free. They have like high tax rates, but not, they're higher than Canada for sure, but not by that much.
but they have some of the like most valuable companies coming out of a country of 5.5 million. Like there are like literally like more unicorns per capita in countries like Estonia and Denmark than there are, in the States and Canada. So it can be done. I don't think you need to have the sort of, survivalist mentality in people to make them work or have a good work ethic. I think happy people make for happy employees.
Yeah.
I think we just have to think about it differently. And unfortunately, in Canada, we think, oh, it's either our system or the U.S. And like those are the only two models, which is not true.
Yeah, that's true. Fair enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. I did want to ask, just in closing, if you do have somebody who's contemplating starting their own business or becoming an entrepreneur, what's the one piece of advice you would give them?
The usual piece of advice I give everyone is to learn to ask for what you want. Someone gave me this advice when I think I was like 20 years old, and it really stuck with me because I think especially as, and I'll speak for myself, as women, as like a person of color often, what I'll do is I'll try and be as humble as possible. This is part of like my upbringing. And it's just like, you can't, toot your own horn or be a certain way. You have to be like super humble and just like content with what you have. And just like grateful for the path that you're on. Learning to ask for what you want kind of flies in the face of that a little bit because you have to be able to recognize the thing that you need and then go after it. And I think it's a bit more of like a more aggressive mentality than at least what I had. And I think I've gotten better at it, but I could be a lot better. And I would just love for people to know that from the beginning. So whether it's advice you need, whether it's money you need, whether it's an introduction to someone you need, know how to ask for it. So, there's a time and place for everything, whether it's network access, whether it's cold emailing, you have to be able to build those skill sets to get to that point because it's something that you can repeat over and over for different things that you'll need at different parts of your business. And the community is often fantastic. Like I will say this about the startup community in Canada, like great, always ready to help. Really lovely. I think lots to be desired on the venture side, but just the startup people themselves are great.
Fantastic. I think we'll end the interview there. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.